needed just to be healthy. And that brought you to, how is food made? You know, what is agriculture? What does it look like? And opened you up to this world, which I feel is the path for a lot of people. You know, that was my path into the regenerative ag space. You know, I came at it from an athletic performance perspective, and you know, looking to improve my diet and find healthier sources of grass-fed beef, and then you know, saw Alan Savory's TED Talk, and that was kind of like the aha moment where you see that everything is connected. What I love hearing is that RLC. And so for those that don't know, the RLC, ARAL, you know, SEA. Because I got confused the first time. I thought you were saying like the letters RLC. I was like, wait, what is that? But that's just me, because I don't have as good geography for the Middle East. But
It's
seeing
in
that
Central
in the
Asia, so
film,
it's in Uzbekistan and part of uh, Kazakhstan. So it's in
oh,
Central.
okay. Okay, gotcha. Central Asia. So Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Yeah. But seeing the size of that lake, what you show in the film, and it was only what in this was it in the 60s that it was still that large, and it's just dried up. So it's 10% of what it used to be. I mean, that is just shocking to see. And, you know, you're familiar with all the things of like ice caps melting, or, you know, the wheat belt in the United States and all the erosion that's happening there. But I really love how you were able to bring in these different perspectives on agriculture that we don't often see, or the storylines or the visuals that are less familiar to folks. And that one was certainly eye-opening for me. And, you know, from there, that was, you know, your aha moment to make the film. But that's not where the movie starts. You know, in the film you kind of start in more of this Western context, you know, with, you know, looking at the different packaging of foods, and then, you know, the health of diets, and then Joel Salatin at Polyface Farm. And so you kind of take this Western context, but then as the movie goes on, you start to move east, and you introduce different cultures and how they've been affected by this changing of agriculture. Tell us a little bit about that, and you know, why you did that, why it's important, and you know, what are some of the things that stood out to you?
Sure. Well, first off, I wanted to start from home. I wanted to start from Canada and North America, and show pretty much what the food trends are. I was lucky to have a group of friends that were like, we're in, and we don't care. Let's, go investigate this and include us in the documentary. So I started there, specifically because I wanted to show not only how we're kind of like separated from the reality of what's really happening on the other side of the world. And I thought that's really important. So I wanted to gradually take the audience from one side of the planet to the other. And yeah, I wanted to show that, hey, there are other ways, and there are better people producing the food in a better way. That's why I brought up Joel Salatin and other farms. But basically, my main idea was to introduce the concept of ethics and justice through basically moving to the eastern side. Specifically speaking, with the amount of agriculture-based food that we're eating, in the West, and being like having trendy foods like vegan and vegetarian diets, I wanted to show, you can have all of your avocado toast as you want, but that doesn't change that bees are dying in Colombian forests, or you can eat all the soys that you want, but that doesn't change the fact that it's one of the reasons why we're having Amazon deforestation. So and moving along to RLC and also Iran. I lived on both sides of the planet, and I always thought we need to talk about the topic of justice and ethics, and what are we doing to not only other species and other people, who's paying the price. That was my main concern, and I wanted to really show the audience, like, these are the people that are providing our food. These are the people that are paying the price. Like, we know all the stories about how farmers in India commit suicide every year, and we know how hard it is to be a farmer. And that doesn't get any better for people living in the desert belt, or in Asia and Northern Africa. So I wanted to show basically our way of life has a cost, and other people are basically paying for it. And this culture of consumption and not knowing where our food comes from. Like I find that we're kind of spoiled in North America. We don't really put the time to think about where is this food, who created that food. So this journey, I did it purposely to kind of like make people feel uncomfortable. And as a filmmaker, I really it's my duty to feel the pain and communicate that pain. So I wanted to basically show what I have experienced and what I wanted to project that in the film, and I hope I've done that.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to say that you were causing, you were inflicting pain upon your viewers. We very much enjoyed, or at least I very much enjoyed watching it. But I very much appreciated the new perspectives and the things that aren't often talked about. A lot of times in, Savory Institute, we focus specifically on holistic management, which, a piece of that is grazing, but holistic management is that broader, decision-making framework for managing complexity. But a lot of the conversations, around the regenerative agriculture space are very narrow at times, and there's not a lot of diversity of what is being shown. And it's a very, white North American male who is often depicted, which, surely there are many of them in the regenerative space that are doing incredible work, but we can't forget to show the stories of everyone else around the world. One, who is doing great work, or two, the people who are being affected by it, which I think you were able to show, both of those, which is great. We were talking the other day a little bit about, your process of making the film, and you mentioned that, you had this, this big list of places that you wanted to go and film and people you wanted to get on camera. And one of those you mentioned was you wanted to film an indigenous community of hunter-gatherers. Tell us a little bit about that and what happened there.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, we had the first year, we just basically spent a lot of, spending our time in reading and researching and development. So, pretty much by the end of the first year of the idea of Sustenance, I kind of knew the kind of people that I wanted to interview, places that I want to go. It was very important to me to show, our ancient way of living, which is hunting and gathering. I wanted to show that, like that was a part of the film that I'm like, we have to capture that and truly honor that and say, this is how our food, it's so hard to hunt and gather, and this is what it used to be, and there are people still doing it. And of course, it was very important for me for this to be an indigenous community. Now, I don't know, some part of it is basically, I would say, trust issues. The other part of it is that, we have a lot of politics, identity politics happening, sadly, in Canada as well. So, I was not able to basically make that connection and have the trust to, allow me to film you. I was very close, and I think it was in Northwest Territory and Inuit community, and it was very close. And they're like, no, if you want to show us hunting, like, no. Apparently there was some vegan filmmakers that completely destroyed that for me. So that was like, no. And also, another fact is that I couldn't really approach many communities just because we did not have an indigenous crew member in our film, and I would have loved to have that, but that was another part of it, that like, no, there's no trust, so no. And eventually I was able to meet up with Joanne, which is an indigenous activist that I've interviewed at the end of the film. And that was just, all by coincidence. And that was really amazing how I met up with her in French River, and she was, doing her ceremony. And I'm just like, and I just heard it. I'm like, that's it. This is my moment. This is it. Like, this is a miracle. And she's amazing. Like, she was just like, yeah, I have no problem. I want to tell my story. There's, it's as if she was, she was like, oh, I was always wanted to, talk about this, and it worked perfectly. Eventually it worked great. But yeah, and then I always say cinema is the art of rejection. So yeah, we were rejected many times, but mostly not by people. I think we filmed in Afghanistan, Tajikistan, in many harsh, like in the middle of the desert.
Mhm.
People are great. I mean, people are amazing. I think what causes difficulties are mostly governments or, unfortunately, policies. And mostly, I think the problem with the borders and, notion of border states and nation, like, basically having we had a lot of problem with borders and crossing and just governments, never people. People were great. Every single nomadic community that and farmers and anyone that we interviewed, like absolutely amazing experience. They were great.
Yeah, it seemed like it. Some of the people like in Morocco, I wasn't familiar with those communities. That was really amazing to see what their lifestyle was like, and not wanting to waste any piece of the animal, just putting that to full use. It's incredible to see that ethos, really fully embodied. And I think the activist woman that you brought up, who was featured at the end of the film, kind of giving this blessing, onto the land. I thought that was a really beautiful way to kind of wrap things up, because, you on your personal journey coming through, learning about, where your food comes from, and then the downstream effects of that. And then there's kind of this way of reminding that, well, it all comes back to what is our relationship with the land, and how do we connect with the land and honor it for what it is, and that connection to place, which I think so many people have lost because of our modern industrial society, and so that connection, I think, is a critical piece in terms of, if you're going to care for the land better, you need to have a reverence for it and respect for it. So that was really beautiful. What are some of the, we got a couple more minutes here before we open it up to the audience Q&A. So audience, don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A section. But tell us a little more about, in the filmmaking, in the process of making this film, like what, there's always stuff that doesn't make it in. So like, what was on the editing room floor that we didn't get to see, either because it, didn't fit with how the story was coming together, or like it was too ridiculous, or, something funny or scary, or I don't know. I feel like whenever I talk to a filmmaker, there's always some really good stuff that I'm like, man, I wish there was a bloopers reel or something that I could learn more from.
Well, to be honest, we had like hours and hours of interviews with everyone that, it was just like oceans of information that we were getting, and they were all amazing. We rewrote the story about 4 times. Like, I was not happy. Like, I would write it, and then we would go to the editing room. We would, put it together. And, I would show it to my husband that, had fresh eyes. I would be like, sit down. If you yawn, if you fall asleep, this is not good. And, so because we would have seen it like hundreds of times, and, just, like, we would lose our, way of thinking that if it's working or not. But we had so many good footage that we wish we could have used. Like, they were just like, if and it's hard because it's an hour and a half, and we started from 3 hours and then slowly made it to an hour and a half. So yeah, there were let me think. So we did have some footage from the yurts and people that are living in tent in Uzbekistan that we ended up not using. And also there were a bunch of interviews that we had with Derek Jensen that we ended up not using. That's because, like, we were just like, it was not really relating to the topic, of what we wanted to go. And that's why I used Derek's interview towards the end, where he talks about cities not being sustainable. But they were all just great. And I was like, no, we have to use these. Of course, Nora, she's a nutrition goddess, and she had so much, information about everything that we wanted to kind of like have more of that in the film. But again, we didn't really have enough time to kind of like, put more information. But yeah, I mean, that's, I think, we just had a lot of good stuff that we couldn't use, sadly.
You told me that you got hit by a cow during one of the filmings.
Yes. So in Polyphase Farms, there is a scene where that's, my brother being the cinematographer. He's like, we need cows in the background. So I'm like, okay, great. And I had my question in my hand, and we're, doing the sound. And, Joel is like, sure, why not? So we're just filming him, going slowly. And then, we have cows in the background. So they grazed the entire place in like, I don't know, maybe like 15 minutes, and they were getting closer and closer. And I'm like, holding the boom and just like trying to focus. And then out of nowhere, I think I moved the wire or a boom pole. And then all of a sudden, I didn't even like see anything. And I just saw Joel's expression. He's like, did you just get hit by a cow? And I just looked down, and I'm like, oh my God. He was like, are you okay? Do you want us to stop? I'm like, no, we don't stop. Let's go. And yeah, that became our like joke. And then later on, he told me how lucky I am, because I had no idea that, I'm not supposed to approach an animal from behind. And, and I didn't even know I was so into the, the whole filming session that I did not, cross my mind. And he was like, you're very lucky you got hit on the upper leg, otherwise it would have been bad. So yeah, that was one moment that it was kind of like funny and painful. But yeah, I got hit by a cow.
Glad to hear that you're okay. And yes, do not generally approach animals from behind. It's
Yes. Learned
that's
it the hard way.
hilarious. Well, and I'm sure the more farms and ranches you go to, the more you learn how
Of
to be
course.
around animals. And I think that just speaks to many of us that come from more of an urban uprising that or upbringing, that you aren't as familiar with animals and how to manage them, or what life is like on a farm, or what it means to care for land, and to have that more watchful eye over the seasons changing, and the types of grasses as they're going to seed, and whatever it may be. I think it speaks to the urban and rural disconnect that is pretty prevalent across the globe. And it's like you were saying, in this Western context that you and I are both in, we kind of have this luxury of convenience all the time, and we don't always know where our food is coming from unless you're really paying attention. And because of that, you're kind of outsourcing all of the negative externalities to others around the globe, and you don't see that because it's all happening hours and hours away from you, which is
Absolutely. And that kind of gives you a kind of like a respect for people that create your food. I think throughout the process of filming Sustenance, I just like gained a lot more respect for farmers and ranchers and food providers. I was just absolutely blown away by how much work these people do. And it's just absolutely amazing. And,
Mhm.
every time we were filming in these locations, like, I just would feel like, and it was exhausting. We would film for like sometimes 10, 12 hours straight while they were working, we were filming. And, it would feel like I am alive. Like at the end of the day, it would be like, wow, it feels like there was a sense of fulfillment being in the farm, that I
Mhm.
was like, wow, that's just absolutely amazing. And it made me realize, now it's really hard for me to go to just a convenient local grocery store and get my food. And I do have really good relation with farmers in Ontario and around me, that I just directly go to them and buy my food, because I know that every single dollar that I'm spending there, just going and helping them, and it's absolutely necessary. I think this is another disconnect that we experience, how easy it is to go to Walmart and just like, not care where the food comes from and just think about the money part of it. Whereas, do we really need all this kind of food that we don't end up eating, and the junk food instead? Why not getting like really amazing food that we know who gave it love and attention and grew it for us? So I think that's something that completely changed my lifestyle after reading and knowing about, and also filming in location.
So it changed how how you feel about it. What about the health issues that you had earlier on that caused you to switch? Have
Yeah.
those resolved?
So yeah, I mean, right now, that will never change. That I do have food sensitivities. Uh, it took me a long time to understand that. I'm celiac, and I can't like eat a lot of things now, including now corn. some kind of rice. Like it's just like it started very like minor, and then it built up, and then now I know exactly what kind of food I should be eating. And it's crazy how like your body just knows, like it's like, no, this is not working. Like, I'm not gonna digest this. This was bad idea. So now I just, not only I feel amazing about the kind of food that I'm eating, I'm also like, it's just, you're eating with that knowledge of, I'm respecting my body. My body now is my temple, and I'm giving it real nourishment. And there's that kind of an ease and kind of like a relaxation that you get when you eat that kind of a food. Whereas like, it was never possible when I was a vegetarian or vegan. Like I was always, first of all, you're always hungry because you're always on sugar, and that kind of like a never really being feeling like, okay, I'm good.
Mhm.
And I'm not really eating as much as I used to before, and everything is kind of like balanced. And I feel great.
Well, that's great. It's good. It's good for personal health. It's good for planetary health. And, isn't it amazing that, what is best for your personal health is also best for planetary health, Funny how that works, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are 30 minutes into our interview, so I'm going to open it up to some of the audience Q&A. I see that we've got a few questions that have started to roll in already, so we're going to go through these. But reminder, folks, that if you do have questions, use the Q&A feature, not the chat. Okay. First question that we have, Yasi, why'd you move to Canada from Iran?
Okay. Well, this was not my decision. It was my family's decision. We lived there. I mean, I lived there until I finished my high school. Um, I would say that, it's not really fun being a woman in Iran. And if you're really seeking justice and kind of like freedom to do things that you would want to do, it's always my home. Shiraz is my city, and it always will be. But, I think we all wanted more than what we're getting. And it was almost kind of like impossible to live the way we were living, and seeing the level of destruction and just political problem that was around us. I mean, I was never involved politically, but it was just also not the right place, and we just wanted basically more than what we were getting there. So I decided as a family to move to Canada.
How old were you when you moved?
Well, I was 17 years old when I left Canada, but I moved to India to study pharmacy. And
Mm.
then when I was 20 years old, I went to Canada. So during that process, we were just basically waiting. So it's been 15 years now that I am in Canada,
Mm.
basically.
And you were able to go back to Iran for filming, right?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I can still go back whenever I want. I'm an Iranian citizen.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
not a problem. And you'll be surprised how, as a tourist, especially, like, Iranians love tourists and they'll welcome you. So, it's not like how news kind of like show Iran as, oh my God, like suicide bombers are walking in the street. It's not like that. People are
Yeah.
very progress. People are always amazing everywhere in the world. But I think our problem was more like, not really getting along with the policies of the government. So,
Mhm. Yeah. What was it like going back, having grown up in Iran and then, having left and, lived in Canada and then India for a period of time and then now going back, later in life and, with this critical eye of wanting to tell a story and, like I know myself, the way that I look at land now that I'm clued in to it, now that I've been with the Savory Institute for a number of years and I've been able to visit all of these, properties around the globe and, have this better connection with land and to better read what's happening at the ground level, I see things in a very different eye than I did, when I was younger and just kind of going through the motions of life. What was it like to go back to Iran, with that lens of this story of agriculture and food and health? Like what did you see?
so I mean, Iran is an absolutely beautiful country, and there's so much to see every time. You go there, you just find places that you just like absolutely blown away by the richness of a culture and just like history. So for me, it's always been like an amazing experience. just discovering different parts of Iran. Specifically for filming Sustenance, I think one thing that I experienced was that, the level of increased desertification and drought in the region. I mean, I've heard about how bad it was,
Mhm.
and I could almost not recognize the rural area of where I grew up, because it was completely destroyed, turned into cities, highways. There
Mm.
were like Shiraz is well known for vineyards and basically like
Shiraz wine. I love it. Yeah.
yes. So I mean, you just see that like for kilometers and kilometers, you see like how dry everything is. You can look at the soil and you can see how cracked it is. Like it's just it was really devastating to see the increased level of desertification and drought, and you can truly see what's happening, because like I wasn't there for like almost a decade, and then when I went back, I'm like, and people wouldn't really notice as much because people are living there and they're just
Yeah.
kind of like you know um living with the situation. And when you're coming from another place and you just remembering how it used to be, like it's funny you mentioned that. My cousin showed me a satellite image of the family farm that we grew up in, and
Mhm.
it's like I did not recognize it. It's
Mm.
just completely changed, completely dry. Like we had like animals, it was by the mountainside, we had like trees, we had completely dry. It's like it was absolutely devastating to see that. But that is why I kind of like wanted to include Zayanderud. Zayanderud is one of the most well-known rivers in Iranian history. Like it's been flourishing for years, and now it's like dry. And it's just looking at it and saying, no, I can't imagine one of the most ancient architecture designs, which is like all of this, the whole entire bridge on top of Zayanderud River. And like we remember it, like at night the light would turn on, and then you would see like 33 bridges, which is literally the translation is 33 bridges. And then the reflection of it in the water, like that's like it's now dry. Like there's no water there. So that was kind of devastating and really hard to accept, I think. But also another reason why I wanted to include Iran and show how hard it is for farmers to kind of like just go and find water and just basically live their lives and have yield crop at the end of the year. And that's really become a huge problem.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's global. It's everywhere you go. And I know that in the regenerative space, there's a lot of conversations around carbon, carbon drawdown, sequestration into, creating soil organic matter, which is important, of course, for the climate crisis we're in and lowering atmospheric CO2. But that connection between carbon and water is so critical. When you increase soil organic matter by 1%, 1 acre can hold an additional 25,000 gallons or something like that. And it's just like this amazing ability for the land to act as a sponge, and you need to activate that soil carbon sponge to properly absorb it. And that helps out in a time of drought, because if you don't have rain falling, well, you better hope that you've got some of that moisture in the land that you can tap into. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you've got torrential downpours that come, you better hope that that sponge is ready to absorb it all. Otherwise, it's going to, hit the hard pan of the soil and wash away. And then you've got all of your nutrients just like washing away and, having those downstream effects, which is really unfortunate to see.
And that's exactly happening in Iran as well. Like we either have drought or flood. Like in Shiraz last year, flood was absolutely crazy. Like we had photos coming in that cars were like on top of the water, and I was just like, wow, this is my hometown. Wonderful. Like it's just yeah, that's happening, like you said, like a lot and everywhere that we're experiencing desertification. So uh,
Mhm.
something to think about. Right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, especially when you think of, the evapotranspiration, and maybe this is getting too technical for people, but, in the photosynthetic process, you're pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. And, one of the byproducts is, yeah, of course, you get oxygen that comes off, and you get the sugars that, create, soil organic matter in the soil. But don't forget that H2O is one of those byproducts that comes off of it. So, you're creating that humidity in the air, those little microclimates around the plants, and it keeps the soil cooler. And that helps create weather patterns. You can see over sometimes, you'll see photos of like a really, you see like a rain shower, and then you'll see a highway. And then because of the heat coming off of the highway, you see that the rain is just gone on that just like column right there. And it's just like this visual effect of, oh, heat coming off of a land, whether that's from pavement or from bare soil or bare dirt, really. The heat that comes off of that affects the weather patterns around us, which then affects, where clouds go to and from because they're pulled by, the hot and cold. Anyways, probably going a little too far off into the deep end of, soil science and the weather patterns. But yeah, we have some more questions. So let me get to some of those. Okay, so Jody Emerson asks, thank you, Yasi, for your hard work. My question is this. Do you think you were able to keep an open mind throughout the process of interviewing people, or were you looking for evidence that would support your preconceived beliefs?
Good question. So the reason why I had so many different participants from different political background and ideologies was because I wanted to keep an open mind, to basically include everybody's ideas and kind of agreeing on the fact that our way of life is not sustainable. So yes, I did, I wanted to interview different kind of people. There's not a single person I think that I've interviewed that are exactly having the same belief and ideology, but they all agree that, we are destroying our habitat, our planet, and, it cannot be sustainable. So yeah, you can say that I wanted to basically interview them to get to that point, because that was a topic of my film, to reach to the absolute, final question of, can we live sustainably and how? Yeah, so.
Yeah. And I think there's also this aspect, at least what I picked up on, and what the film seemed to me as, is that this wasn't just someone who has an idea that they want to put into documentary form, but rather this was a journey for you as an individual. I mean, that's what I saw. You are someone who came to this, with questions and, with realizations of, seeing the RLC and realizing, oh my God, what is happening here, and needing to go explore. When we talked the other day, you were mentioning, well, you saw that, and, your acupuncturist said to read, Lear Keith's book. So you did. And then you asked Lear, who should I talk to? And she introduced you to Nora Gagaudis. And then you talked to Nora and you said, who should I talk to? And she said, Alan Savory. And so you talked to Alan. And so it's just kind of that point of curiosity that led the conversation, it seemed like to me, rather than having an agenda moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, which, and I also did, kind of like took a step back and try to read and go to other directions as well, and read other theories, and kind of see, where, kind of became a judge of my own research. So that is why I dedicated the first year in just reading and researching. So some of the people that I read, or pretty much had nothing to do with one another. For example, I had a list of books somewhere that, for example, one of the writers that I absolutely adored, and he opened my horizon about Sweetness and Power, is called the book, and it's by Sidney Mintz. So he kind of he talks about kind of a different topic of diseases of civilization, and how slavery and power was created by, the beginning of dawn of it was with sugar plantation and creation of sugar. And then of course we had other people like Richard Manning. That was really a good influencer for me. I read his books about grasslands, and his own, books about his experiences that he had in the United States about, bison and grasslands, and the connections with the borders and everything. So yeah, and then I had my professors that basically gave me a bunch of good reads. Richard Robbins was one of them, which talks about the culture of consumption and capitalism, and how borders are as we know it, and racism and class division is causing, it's also related to the politics of food. So I tried to really go in different directions, but they all led to one kind of final destination, that we are destroying our planet and we should be doing something about it. So I just wanted to convey that message.
Yeah, and it's funny that you said, well, it's not funny that you say that, but I find something similar that when you talk to people, about this type of work, if you're going down to the root cause, which in holistic management, that's part of the decision making framework, is you look at, am I getting the greatest marginal reaction? Is this decision sustainable? But are you getting to the root cause of an issue? And when you really ask, why is something happening, you do come up with a lot of these things in terms of, racial injustice, neoliberal capitalism, all of these things that are massive players at the global scale and leading to, these types of systems, whether it's industrial agriculture or whatever, that are causing so many problems. When you go deep enough, you'll see that everything is connected, as John Muir says, I think, something along those lines. Anyways, a few more questions. Viviane asks, what was for you personally the most impressive situation during making the film?
Impressive situation for me. Well, I think just getting to know, basically filming all over the world and just kind of seeing that we as human beings, we're not here to, destroy each other and hate each other. That's something that, we are human beings, and we are, whether we like it or not, we are sociable human beings, and we have we have a tendency to be in community and being together. So, I think one of the most impressive things that I experienced was that making the film created its own kind of a community. So, from around the world, even finding, camera operators and people that we would meet, they were just like basically travelers like us, and we're like, oh, we love your film, we want to be a part of it. So we slowly like I was looking at people's location when I was sending them the film's link from crowdfunding campaign. They're from all over the world, and that's absolutely amazing that I was able to experience that and have a little community of people that I could bring in together. Of course, it was not just me alone. Film is like collaboration work of so many people, and everybody just works so hard. And I think I appreciated, I appreciate every single person that really helped along the way, every single crew member, cast participant, everyone that helped. Like that just made me realize that I'm not alone, and I don't need to be standing by myself and sending a message. This could be like a community of people, and I think we all agreed that we care about life and justice more than we care about profit. So this film was possible, and I think that's one of the most impressive experiences that I had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the human element, absolutely. Okay, great. All right, Mary Simpson asks, looking forward to seeing the movie. As a farmer, I'm seeing the limits to the independent family farm. What types of collaboration did you see among indigenous food producers? Co-ops, alliances, collaborating to compete, etc.
Mary, are you asking if are you talking about the collaboration in communities that I interviewed in East side, like in Central Asia, because these are nomadic tribes, if that's what you're asking. These are nomadic or basically indigenous communities that they live in separate tents or kind of like establishment, but they're all living as tribes or as communities together. So it's like we always say, we hunt together, we eat together, kind of a thing. So they would migrate together, they would hunt together, they would raise their herd together, they would there's a scene in the film where we see all women like making wool, fabric out of wool, and they're just like there is another scene that there are men that are basically taking the wool off of the herd. And basically, yes, they all work as a community together, and they basically survive together. I hope I answered your question, but it's completely different from what we experience in North America, and I totally understand how difficult it is to be an independent farmer. And I think one thing that separates the two part of the world from each other is that these communities just basically live with Mother Nature and with their animals, And there's not a really profit to be made. It's just a matter of survival and living in the locations that they are, living with nature. So I think that the question of profit comes out of this equation, because they're just surviving, and it's basically surviving with Mother Nature.
Yeah, it's a very different lifestyle that you see in terms of pastoralist, nomadic people versus a more settled farmer rancher experience. That farming and ranching is more of the what has happened since the dawn of the agricultural era 10,000 years ago, and then pastoralism is there's a level of domestication, because you do have animals that are being controlled, but there still is that movement across the land. And so it's a very different context and a very different lifestyle. I know that the Savory Institute, we work with folks of all different backgrounds across the globe, whether you've got 100,000 acre ranch, or you're a nomadic herder in Mongolia, or a smallholder farming community in South Africa, or whatever it may be. All of these different people have come to the table with a very different context and a very different way of life, and very different traditions that they are bringing forward and trying to honor in what they do. And I think that's some of the beauty of when you really get into this work, is there's no one size fits all approach to agriculture, and there's no single silver bullet solution to any of this. Everything looks different, and what works for you is going to be different from your neighbor, and it's going to be different for you this year versus what it was last year, depending on the changing conditions. And so it's just embracing that. And I'm speaking from the Savory Institute perspective here, but it's all about embracing that unique context and the local context of the individual. And I think you always got to be wary of someone who tries to come in with as this outsider perspective of this is the model that needs to be followed. Always take that with a huge grain of salt, because whatever action you do should be guided by your holistic context. So, yeah. Okay, we've got two more questions. Alan Savory mentioned in the film that he's focusing on policy at this point in his life. Please comment on why he's doing this. I guess that would probably, would you prefer that I answer that one from Savory's end? Sure. Yeah, so Alan is definitely focusing on holistic policymaking at this point in his life more so. He developed holistic management and holistic planned grazing really in the 60s, and has been beating that drum for many decades. And now it has moved beyond, Alan, just this one guy, out there, going and consulting with different organizations and ranchers to teach them this. And now it's this global movement. We've got the Savory Global Network. We've got about 50 accredited hubs around the world. We've influenced tens of millions of acres. Alan is looking for, in his final years, he's 85 years old at this point, what is that lever that he can really utilize and tap onto that's going to get the greatest marginal reaction in terms of causing change, not just in terms of how we manage land and livestock, but in terms of how we manage complexity on the whole, as individuals. And he's identified policymaking as a piece of that. If you read the Holistic Management book, he will go into the policy piece a little bit towards the end. But Alan's really convinced that policy is an area that we really need to improve upon. It's become this very tribal, nasty, world where people are just, there's a lot of influence that is causing people to move in, terrible directions, and the outcomes of that are, what we call wicked problems. And to resolve that, we need to get everyone at the table. We need to be aligned on what we want in this world, and we need to be, making policies using that same framework that we use to manage land and livestock, that we teach via the holistic management framework. So that's where his focus is these days. If anyone's interested, you can jump on the Savory Institute blog and look for any of Alan's posts. He's got some recent posts there talking about policy stuff. All right, two more. Glenn says, Joel and Jose demonstrated 2-point source successes, Iran and the Aral Sea. Now mostly a desert are disasters. Savory and the holistic management framework are a bridge to the forgiveness of grasses and ground cover. There are Savory hubs in the region. Are they able to have a presence in those locations?
Sorry, you were cutting off. I didn't understand the question.
Okay, so Joel, all right, so we've got 2 point source successes that are shown in the film. Yet Iran and the RLC, it's now mostly a desert. That's a disaster. So we've got some successes, and then we've got some major problems that are being shown. And then there is the Savory Institute and the Savory Global Network and the Holistic Management Framework. So they're a bridge, that can help, regenerate grass and ground cover. And so basically, I think what Glenn is getting at is there an opportunity here for, the Savory Global Network to work in these areas in Iran and the RLC?
I think that you mentioned that, Glenn, because when I met up with Alan, he was actually telling me that before the revolution, he was offered to basically be in Iran and work on the desertifying land. Back then, we're talking, I think, about 40 years ago. And of course, revolution happened and that was out of a question. But I think that's an absolute necessity of us bringing the holistic management to these lands and kind of like give it a fresh start. As we mentioned in part of the film, places like, the Hindu Kush Mountains or the Pamir Plateau, they, not much really grows, and the survival of those people really depends on the survival of their herds and the whole effect of the herd effect that Alan speaks about. So yes, and the same thing goes in Iran. Iran, most part of the desertified land in Iran, there used to be savannas and forests, and now we see a desert. It's not like there were always deserts in Iraq and Iran, and North Africa, as we mentioned in the film, was heavily forested, and now it has turned into desert because of logging and mining, and of course, agriculture as well. So I think that's something that we definitely need to work on and bring back these policies and holistic management to the land. Will it happen? I don't know. I think there's a lot of profit to be made by certain people and certain governments, and this profit is so high that I don't think it will be possible in a global scale to as we see it right now. I mean, even as we speak, the food production is basically controlled by just few companies as we know it. That basically controls everything, all the food production in the world. So that is something that we have to. I wish we would have done that years ago in Iran and in North Africa as well, but. Yeah, I think that's a necessity for sure, and good question.
Yeah. And from Savory Institute's perspective, yeah, we would, our strategy is more of a pull strategy more than a push. So, we wait for people to come to us, asking, for assistance, because Savory Institute, we're a nonprofit, we're a small team. We've got 12 staff, we can't be everywhere. But we look for that greatest marginal reaction. And when people are ready to change, and they are interested in learning the framework and seeing how the programs that we have can help various communities that are out there, by all means, we are ready to go in and help. And if an opportunity came about for a hub to be established in Iran or any of these other countries, we would definitely jump on that, because it's definitely an area that is in need of support. So it's kind of us just waiting to find that right opportunity. Just to speak to some of the people that are around there, we do have a hub in Pakistan and a hub in Turkey. So there is some work happening in that region, but of course, as is the case with everywhere, more can be done, and it will be done, but it's a process, and incrementally we're getting there. All right, last question, because I see we're at the top of the hour. Greer Taylor asks, haven't seen your movie yet. Sounds amazing. I think one of our greatest obstacles is to overcome the idea of cheap food and not paying properly for food. How do you see that playing out in our world? I sense it's pushing shortcuts that destroy.
So yes, I mean, I am absolutely against the concept of cheap food, and it's cheap for whom? And that cheap food that we purchase, somebody definitely paid for it. Somebody's right was definitely, it's I mean, and this is a concept that we're every day talking and thinking that this is something normal and okay. It's our right to have cheap food, or it has to be cheap, and that's why we go towards that notion. But I couldn't include that part of an interview, but Nora mentioned something in her book and also in her interview that was not in the film, but the concept of cheap food. So when you actually put the cost of all these diseases and everything that you will get from these cheap food consumptions, and the total cost of what is truly costing, what soil, like what was desertified, how many species were dead, who created that food, and are they getting even paid? So what is the whole question of cheap food? So when you put all of these concepts together, you realize that yeah, it is our right to have access to good food. Grass-fed farming and grass-fed food should not be expensive. It should be available everywhere. Why is it that we have factory farming that is way more affordable? Like, something is wrong, and we're giving that corn, and why is that corn really cheap? This is a system that I think needs to be completely broken into pieces, and we need to start all of these steps again, because it's definitely not justice, it's not fair. And as I mentioned, there is a profit to be made. I mean, you buy a box of cereal, and that's 1000% profit in one box of cereal. Now, yeah, it is cheap, but was it cheap for all of those animals and species that died in in that land? Or the monocrops that, as we know it, are causing deforestation and creating disaster around the world? Like, I mean, does that really worth that box of cereal? I mean, maybe we should really kind of question and rethink holistically, and think about us as a whole circle, instead of what is benefiting me as an individual, because that's clearly not working.
Yeah.
In my view.
in many people's views, in the world's view. So with that, I think we're gonna wrap it up today. Thank you everyone for attending and for all your questions. Yasi, thank you so much for being here and speaking to all of us. Thank you for this beautiful film that tells this very important story. For those that have not yet seen the movie, I just dropped it in the chat. Go to sustenancemovie.com. You can find out where to watch it. It's available all over the place, Vimeo, YouTube, Amazon, I don't know, all the places. Go to the website and it'll tell you where to go. And I know that, Yasi, as an independent filmmaker, you're self-distributing. So, every view counts of this, and, everyone who goes to pay to watch the film, helps you out to recoup your costs. And importantly, if you can leave a review at IMDb for Sustenance, that really goes a long way. Yasi, anything you want to leave everyone with today?
Yes, and if it's possible for people to just jump into the website, sign up for our newsletter, and kind of join our little community, global community of fans. And yeah, I mean, just share our pages and just add us in social media, and any post that you like, you can share. And the more people we have viewing this, the better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Here, appreciate that. And then just one last thing, just to show you all, next week we have another webinar with the author of the book Wild Like Flowers. And so this is Daniel Griffith, who wrote this new book, Wild Like Flowers, The Restoration of Relationship Through Regeneration. Daniel is not only the author of this book, he is also the Savory hub leader at the Robinia Institute, which is the hub in Central Virginia. You'll see a quote from Alan Savory there at the top of the book. Alan says it's a beautifully written book that exudes atmosphere and a deeply felt sense of place. So if you want to join on that, that's going to be 1 week from today. So it's going to be next Wednesday, March 10th at the same time, 1 p.m. Mountain. Here's the website down here towards the bottom of the screen, Savory.global Wild Like Flowers webinar. We'll have that out on our social media channels, but just wanted to drop that in for anyone that was interested. And with that, I think we're going to wrap today. Yasi, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And congratulations on this film. I wish you much success.
Thank you very much.